I smoothed out my skirt and took a deep breath before pushing open the heavy oak door to Christopher's new office. The sign on the door, shining with fresh varnish, read, "President Christopher Perry." The letters on it were written in a strict font, each with a golden sheen, as if trying to suggest that its owner occupies an unshakable position. But it all looked to me like a symbol of something darker and colder. Christopher was sitting at a massive desk, bathed in the light of a desk lamp, engrossed in a computer screen. He looked tense, but I hoped his face would brighten up when he saw me, his wife. However, when he looked up, his expression remained just as stern. "Shelley, I'm very busy. What is it?" he said dryly, barely glancing at me. I suppressed my involuntary disappointment and forced myself to smile, trying not to show my resentment. "Henderson's account files are ready for you," I said calmly. "And the staff meeting starts in 10 minutes. He waved his hand, casually, as if my information was superfluous to him. "Cancel it, I have more important things to do." His voice sounded impassive, but as if hiding something elusive. "But, Christopher," I persisted, even though each of his answers seemed to be trying to knock the ground out from under my feet. "Everyone has been working hard all week to prepare for this meeting. They expect you to be there." "Cancel it," he repeated, in a tougher tone. "This is an order, not a request." I shuddered, feeling something settle inside, as if the Christopher I once knew had completely disappeared, leaving a stranger in his place. With a curt nod, I turned around, left, and carefully closed the door behind me, as if I hoped not to disturb his thoughts. In the hallway, I stopped, pressed myself against the wall, feeling my heart pounding so hard that it seemed like it was about to pop out. I had to summon all my strength to keep from crying. It was all so alien. It seemed as if someone had taken over not only his office, but also himself. That Christopher, who talked with sincere enthusiasm about each new project, about how his team inspires him, about the desire to be not just a boss for everyone, but also a friend. "Is everything all right, Shelley?" I looked up and saw Michael, Christopher's father. Although he was officially retired, his tall, imposing silhouette often appeared in the office. There was a faint worry in his eyes. "Of course, Michael," I replied, forcing a smile again, although I felt how hard it was to keep it. "It's just a busy morning." He looked at me carefully, and I realized that he could see right through everything. "I'm fine, but you don't look good, Shelley." "What did Christopher do this time?" His voice sounded warm, but I also caught a note of firmness in it. I hesitated, torn between the desire to remain faithful to my husband and a growing sense of helplessness. "It's nothing special," I tried to answer, trying not to betray the tremor in my voice. "Christopher is just getting used to his new role." At these words, Michael's face clouded with concern. My thoughts were somewhere far away from the disappointed faces of our team who greeted me when I announced that the meeting was canceled. The sight of their downcast looks and displeased expressions caused me a sharp pain in my chest, but it was nothing compared to the strange feeling that squeezed my heart when I remembered how Christopher, with a slight cunning in his voice, talked about some lunch with Carol. It's the name, its tone. My intuition, which was rarely wrong, told me that this dinner might have had a completely non-business connotation. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, determined to make up for what might have been lost due to yesterday's conflict. As soon as I entered, the usual hum of voices and the slight rustle of paper were replaced by a strained silence. It seemed that every look, every "good morning" was fake. There was something more behind it. Evelyn, our lead designer, came towards me, her eyes shining with restrained curiosity and concern. "Shelley, is there any news about the rescheduling of meetings?" Her voice was soft, but I noticed a hidden shadow of discontent. I hesitated, weighing my words, trying not to betray my own discord. I'm working on it, Evelyn. Christopher, well, he's still adjusting to his new role. Evelyn raised her eyebrows, as if trying to figure out exactly what I meant. Is that what we call it now? What is it? She asked with a hint of sarcasm, but painfully sincere. But I didn't have time to answer. His loud, demanding voice suddenly rang out from Christopher's office, overshadowing the muffled conversations in the office. Shelley. My office. Right now. I shuddered, trying not to show my emotions, and hurried to his door. Christopher met me with a look full of annoyance. He handed me a pile of documents, which I barely managed to hold, a heavy bundle of papers that filled the thin air of the room. When I looked at the first sheet, everything inside me turned cold. It was an official complaint from the design team, which mentioned Christopher's absence from key meetings, delays, and lack of support in approving projects. I looked up, trying to choose the words that would calm him down. Christopher, they're just upset, I began softly. If we could arrange a meeting and listen to their problems. Their problems? He interrupted me with a smirk, not hiding his disdain. I'm in business, not kindergarten. If they can't stand the pressure, they can leave. I felt my insides go cold at his words. These were employees who had worked for the company for many years, those who had once helped his father build this business from scratch. But, Christopher, I desperately searched for the right words, knowing that this was not only about business, but also about what was personal to him and me. These are your father's most trusted people. His eyes flashed with anger. My father, he repeated contemptuously. He is no longer in the company. I'm in charge here now. And I'm not going to let a bunch of whiny designers question my authority. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the pain. I wish I could bring back the Christopher with whom I once started this journey, a man with such respect for each of his employees. I looked into his eyes, hoping to see a glimmer of the old sincerity, but instead I felt like just another one of his subordinates. As I turned to leave, I noticed his phone vibrate. Christopher looked at the screen, and that mysterious, sly smile flashed across his face. I'm going out for lunch. Don't make any calls, he said, not looking at me. But, Christopher, we have a meeting with a client at 2:00, I reminded him, hoping with the last of my strength that he would return to his former responsibilities. Move her, he replied, already stepping towards the door, without giving me the slightest chance to object. I watched him walk away down the hall, and something inside me shrank. This situation was no longer just a work stress. There was a threat of something more, inevitable in the air. When I returned to my desk, I immediately plunged into solving the accumulated problems, answered calls from dissatisfied customers, and tried to calm the outraged employees. By noon, I was feeling completely exhausted when a light knock on the wall of my cubicle brought me out of deep thought. When I looked up, I saw Michael standing in front of me. His face was worried, but there was a warm concern in his eyes. Shelley, darling, do you have a minute? I nodded, feeling tired and grateful for the unexpected break. Michael sat down across from me, his gaze serious and full of tenderness. I've heard something about Christopher running the company. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I swallowed, not knowing what to say, feeling tears involuntarily begin to burn my eyes. Michael put his life into this business, entrusting Christopher with his future. How could I tell him that everything was falling apart? Michael, I started, but he raised his hands to stop me. You don't have to protect him, Shelley. Not for me. I've known for a long time that something is wrong. I was just hoping that he would grow into this role. He spoke calmly, but there was a pang of disappointment in his voice. I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I whispered, as if letting out the pain that I had been trying to numb for so long. I do not know what to do, Michael. He pushes everyone away. Michael squeezed my hand tightly. His calm presence seemed to protect me from the shattered world around me. We'll figure this out, Shelley, together, he said firmly, his voice confident and calm. This company, this family means everything to me. I'm not going to let Christopher ruin it. At that moment, Christopher's voice boomed throughout the office, echoing through the walls, filling the atmosphere with new tension. I flinched, and Michael immediately squeezed my hand, as if to say, I'm here. Christopher was wandering around somewhere, venting his annoyance at one of the employees, and Michael and I exchanged glances. It seemed that the storm was far from over, and I stood up, ready to meet the next whirlwind of disorder that he undoubtedly brought with him. Michael's words echoed in my head. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope, like the first ray of sunlight in a gray dawn. But when I turned the corner, hoping that I could still talk to Christopher, I saw him standing in front of the window, with his tie loosened haphazardly and a smudge of lipstick, scarlet and bright as a challenge, on his collar. That glimmer of hope disappeared like smoke. The man I loved was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop him. Later, returning home, tired and exhausted after another day of trying to keep the company afloat, I felt that I had no more strength left. The only thing I wanted was a hot bath and a glass of wine to forget for a moment about the growing chaos around me. But just as I was reaching for my keys, the front door swung open and a stunning blonde stood in front of me. Her bright lipstick was slightly smudged, and the top buttons of her blouse were casually buttoned, as if she was in a hurry. She froze for a moment when she saw me, her eyes widened, but soon she quickly pulled herself together and with a light, almost sarcastic smile said, "Oh, you must be Shelley." Her voice was soft, almost mocking. "I'm Carol, Christopher's consultant." My world has been shaken. That name, her lipstick on his collar. Everything came together with painful clarity, pierced like a blow, depriving of breath. A consultant? My voice was barely audible, almost a whisper, but Carol caught every word. Her lips curled into a sly smile. "Oh, yes, Christopher and I work very closely together," she said with such a clear hint that there was no doubt. "He's a real visionary, you know." Before I could answer, Christopher appeared from the doorway, his face pale, as if the last of his vitality had drained out of him. "Shelley, are you home yet?" he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I tried to read in his face at least a hint of guilt, of remorse, but I saw only fear and futile attempts to maintain the remnants of control. Christopher immediately turned to Carol and almost forcibly pushed her towards the car, barely noticeably exchanging a knowing look with her. She drove away, leaving me on the doorstep, feeling as if everything inside was frozen. Christopher turned to me, his face stony, but his eyes darted, betraying a hidden panic. "Shelley, it's not what you think," he began hurriedly, his voice sounding too low, too hasty. "Carol. She just helps with new projects. We discussed ideas." I couldn't listen to it anymore. I couldn't hold back the scream that was bursting out. All the words, all the accumulated pain, were ready to burst out. "Don't lie to me, Christopher, not now." I met his gaze, and he froze for a moment. His confidence, as if it had become his mask, collapsed. I didn't want this to happen," he whispered, as if he were telling the truth for the first time. It just happened." My voice trembled, and seemed to tremble with me. "How, simply, can you ignore your responsibilities at work? How, simply, can you treat our employees, our friends, as if they don't matter?" I couldn't take his excuses anymore. My heart was tearing apart, but my voice sounded firm. "You don't understand, Shelley." He cut her off abruptly. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. My father left me company, but I can't fill his shoes, I can't. Will you fill his shoes by having an affair and slowly destroying what he was building? My voice was firm, but inside I felt like something in me had completely broken down. His face contorted with disappointment, and he turned away, as if my words had touched him to the core. My own hopes were dashed, but I didn't let myself show it. For the first time in a long time, I said something that had been in my heart for a long time. We're not bus anymore, Christopher, I said coldly, almost mechanically. You did it yourself. As I said these words, I realized that they were the truth that I was afraid to accept. Everything we once had, our dreams, our marriage, our life together, has crumbled, destroyed by his betrayal and my own blind trust. At that moment, his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, and I felt a familiar burning sensation under my heart. It was Carol, I knew it, as I would have known the smell of danger in a dark alley. He didn't even deny it. Shelley, please let me explain. There was a plea in his voice, but I was too tired of his lies and excuses. I grabbed the keys and, without hesitation, headed for the door. Where are you going? What is it? He asked, sounding confused. Away from you. My voice was calm, cold, devoid of emotion. I need to think. I got into the car, started the engine and drove slowly out onto the road, letting the darkness of the streets carry me away from the house, which now seemed strange. Tears blurred my eyes, but I didn't let them break out. How did it come to this? The man I once loved, the one with whom we built a life and shared dreams, now seemed to be lost in other people's shadows, and everything around us was collapsing like a house of cards. The phone rang in my ears, and Michael's name flashed on the screen. I froze for a moment, my heart skipped a beat, but then I pulled myself together and answered. Shelley, are you all right? You left the office so quickly. Michael's voice was full of anxiety. His kindness flowed through my ruined walls like cool water, and suddenly everything spilled out of me. The story about Christopher, about the company, about my broken heart, everything that I have kept to myself for so long. Michael listened to my confession in silence, without interrupting, and then spoke softly. Shelley, I'm so sorry. It's my fault. I shouldn't have put so much pressure on Christopher. No, Michael, it's not your fault, I replied, feeling that something was subtly changing in my soul. Christopher made his choice. Michael sighed, but his voice remained firm as he said, Still, we have to deal with this. Come to my place, we'll discuss what to do. I drove to Michael's, feeling a strange, unfamiliar sense of calm. Christopher's betrayal was finally exposed, but I wasn't alone. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of strength inside me, the strength to face whatever was coming. No excuses, no vague hopes. It's time to stand up for myself and for the company that has become my second home. The next morning, I walked into the office with my head held high, ignoring the whispers and sidelong glances of colleagues. Talking to Michael made me determined, but nothing could have prepared me for what was waiting around the corner. Christopher stood in the middle of the office with his arm around Carol's waist. She was wearing a pencil skirt and blouse, almost an exact replica of the one I once wore myself, back when I still believed that I had a reliable shoulder next to me. Christopher spoke loudly and confidently. I want you to meet Carol. She will join our team as a special consultant. My heart was pounding painfully when his gaze crossed mine. Carol had a sly grin on her face, and she seemed to be enjoying her new position. Evelyn, our lead designer, was standing next to Christopher. She broke the silence first. But, Mr. Perry, we already have a full team. And by the way, Shelley. Christopher interrupted her with a casual wave of his hand. "Shelley's going to help Carol, isn't she?" he said. His voice was pompous, like an actor's, and there was nothing but subtle malice behind those words. I felt the stares of my colleagues on me, a mixture of pity and curiosity. Gathering my courage, I smiled, although it looked more like a grimace. "Of course. Welcome, Carol." The next few hours passed in a haze of strained smiles and undercurrent of tension. I returned to my office, trying my best to focus on my work, but my thoughts stubbornly returned to what I had seen in the morning. I felt that my strength was leaving me. A knock on the door startled me. It was Michael, his face full of worry. "Shelley, I just heard about the appointment. Are you all right?" I shook my head, fighting back tears. "I don't know how much longer I can take it, Michael. It seems to me that Christopher is doing everything to hurt me in every possible way." Michael's face became serious. He looked determined, as if something inside him had snapped too. "It's time to end this," he said. "I'm calling an emergency meeting of the board of directors. Christopher has gone too far." Before I could answer, the door burst open with a bang. Christopher burst into the office, his face flushed with anger. "What are you doing, Father?" he growled. "This is my company. You can't just barge in here and—" "That's enough." Michael's voice was firm and decisive, and he stopped Christopher in mid-sentence. "You've made fun of everything I've worked so hard for. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." Christopher's eyes narrowed and a smile of icy cynicism flashed across his face. "The consequences?" he drawled. "I'm just getting started." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, throwing it on the table in front of Michael. "Consider this my first official act as president." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were the divorce papers signed by Christopher. My throat was dry, and my soul was filled with emptiness. Christopher looked at me coldly, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You're fired." It took me a moment to realize the meaning of his words. They pierced my consciousness like sharp needles, leaving behind a feeling of disbelief and resentment that inexorably rolled in like a wave. Christopher laughed. His laugh was cold, distant, as if he deliberately wanted to hurt me even more. "Fire you?" "Oh, no, Shelley. I'm freeing you from this job, from this marriage, from everything that we had." He mockingly spread his hands, as if justifying himself to an invisible audience. I looked at the papers, and it seemed like my whole world was crumbling, like fragile porcelain breaking on stones. The years of our lives, common dreams, plans, all this turned into several dry sheets with soulless legal formulations. Michael, who was standing next to him, clenched his fists, trying to calm the heated atmosphere. "Christopher, stop. Think about what you're doing. Shelley is the foundation of the company. She kept it afloat when you—" His voice faltered, but he continued, "Without her, you—" "Without her?" Christopher snapped, giving his father a scornful look. "Admit it, Dad. Your methods are outdated. Carol and I know how to lead the company forward. We have big plans with her." While the father and son got into a heated argument, I felt a strange, quiet calmness spreading inside me. Christopher's words, his indifference, seemed to cut off the last emotional knot that connected me to him. I looked down at the divorce papers, then back at Christopher, who now seemed like a stranger, almost a stranger. At that moment, I made a decision. "I'll sign it," I said quietly, interrupting their argument. Both men turned to me in amazement, and Christopher seemed to be the first to put a smug smile back on his face. "I knew you'd understand, Shelley." His voice was laced with false warmth. It's really for the best. I met his gaze calmly, without looking away. You're right, Christopher. It's for the best, but not for the reasons you'd like to think. As I signed the papers, I felt a weight that seemed unbearable to me fall off my shoulders. Christopher may have ruined our marriage, but I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I'm leaving, I said, my words sounding firm and confident. Christopher suddenly frowned, his complacency fading. You can't just. He began, but I interrupted him. I can. Good luck running the company, Christopher. You're going to need it. As I walked to the exit, holding my head high, Michael's voice rang out in the hallway. Shelley, wait. I stopped and looked back. There was both pride and determination in his eyes, as if they reflected the rest of the strength I'd lost. I have an offer for you, he said, coming closer, that can save this company and maybe give you a chance to start over, the way you deserve. Michael's words sparked a spark of hope in my soul, long since extinguished amid the gray days and ruined plans. I realized that I was ready. Ready for change, ready to stop being a shadow of myself. Later, sitting across from Michael in his cozy office, I hugged a warm mug of tea, feeling its warmth gradually fill the void inside. Over the past few days, my thoughts have turned back to the past more than once, like a storm, spinning frames one by one. Shelley, Michael began, his voice flat, with a hint of respect. I want you to come work for my nonprofit architectural foundation. We need someone with your skills and integrity. I blinked in surprise, barely realizing what I had heard. An architectural foundation? I thought he would offer to return to the company. But Michael, what about the company? Christopher. I looked at him for an answer. Christopher has made his choice, he said softly, and for a moment there was a shadow of sadness in his eyes. Now it's time for you to make yours. My heart suddenly sped up when the phone vibrated in my hand. It was a message from Evelyn, SOS. Everything is falling apart here. Christopher and Carol are completely ruining everything. We need you, Shelley. A feeling of longing and responsibility gripped me. Despite the betrayal and bitterness, I still cared about the company and the people who stood by me all these years. I need time to think, I said, looking up at Michael with eyes full of doubt. Sure, but don't drag it out, he nodded, his expression full of understanding. We both know Christopher won't waste time dismantling what we've built. The next morning, pulling myself together, I entered the office for the last time to clear my desk. The atmosphere was tense, and conversations died down as soon as I passed by. As I was carefully packing my things, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face worried. Shelley, thank God you're here. This is a disaster. Christopher canceled for major projects, and Carol regrouped the teams without taking into account their skills. Customers start asking questions. I don't work here anymore, Evelyn, I said, trying to keep my voice level, although the tension still slipped through my words. I can't help you. Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. Are you leaving? But what about us? What about the company? Before I could even answer, Christopher's loud, authoritative voice rang out from the hallway. Shelley, what are you doing here? He burst into my office, followed by Carol, with a smug expression on her face. I took a quick look at them, trying not to show emotion. Just picking up my things, I replied with restraint, trying not to succumb to his pressure. Christopher narrowed his eyes like a predator who has lost his patience. Great, the sooner you leave, the better, he snorted. Carol will handle your duties. I couldn't help but chuckle when I saw Carol step forward, confidently digging her manicured nails into Christopher's hand, as if consolidating her superiority. I'm doing great. Christopher says I'm a natural talent, she added with a touch of arrogance. I held her gaze, answering coldly. Maybe. But successful management of an architectural firm requires more than just naturalness. Christopher's face turned red, and he seemed to be boiling with anger. Go away, Shelley. You're not welcome here. I picked up the box of things, ready to leave, but suddenly I noticed movement in the hallway. Michael appeared, surrounded by 3 board members. There was a firm determination on his face. What's going on here? Christopher looked at them defiantly, but Michael's voice remained calm and unwavering. Get together for an emergency board meeting, Christopher. Your recent decisions have put the company at risk, and we are here to discuss your future. Michael's words instantly knocked the confidence out of Christopher. You can't do that. I'm in charge here. One of the board members looked at Christopher seriously and shook his head. Now let's see, he replied, pointing towards the conference room. Michael turned to me, and there was a faint, barely noticeable smile in his eyes. Shelley, we could use your ideas at this meeting. If you want, of course. I froze for a moment, torn between the desire to get away from all this chaos and a sincere attachment to the company that I helped build for many years. Christopher noticed my hesitation and grinned sharply. She doesn't work here anymore, Dad. She can't say anything. Something clicked in me. Putting the box on the table, I straightened up, holding my head high. Actually, I think I'll stay for this meeting. I think I'm the only person who knows how this company is actually run. Christopher and Carol gasped at the same time. A shadow of concern flickered in their eyes, but Michael, on the contrary, smiled. Pride was visible on his face. I took a step into the conference room, feeling a firm resolve awaken in me. It wasn't just me. It was a struggle for the legacy that Michael built, and for the fate of all those who invested their lives in the company. When the meeting began, I spread out reports and graphs on the table, each of which was silent but undeniable evidence of how badly the company under Christopher's management had suffered. We have lost 3 major clients in just the last month. I spoke clearly and confidently, although my heart was pounding like a bell, but I kept myself in control, knowing that this was our only chance. The reputation of the company is falling, and the morale of the employees is at its limit, I said, meeting the eyes of each member of the board. Christopher's face turned purple with anger. This is absurd. He exploded. We have everything under control. Carol and I are working on new strategies that are taking us deeper and deeper to the edge, Michael interrupted abruptly, his voice harsh and unyielding. The numbers don't lie, Christopher. I noticed the board members exchanging anxious glances. It was a moment of truth that would decide the fate of the company. Carol intervened, insisting that Christopher worked day and night coming up with new ideas and was in the office until late at night. I couldn't help but smile sarcastically. Is that what you call it? Because from where I stand, all I see is a company in crisis and a president who cares more about his personal ambitions than his responsibilities. Christopher's eyes flashed with anger, and tension distorted his face. You don't know what you're talking about, Shelley. You're just mad because I left, he said irritably, adding as if that explained everything. I smiled bitterly. You ruined our marriage, Christopher. And now you're destroying this company, too. You're taking her to the edge, ready to burn everything down. Mr. David, the most senior member of the board, cleared his throat, his voice sounding firm, as if clarity had cut through the stagnant air. I think we've heard enough, he said. It is obvious that drastic measures must be taken to save the company. Christopher's face paled instantly. What do you mean? He looked around helplessly, but it was Mr. David who took the floor, indicating a direct threat to his power. We need to think about the new leadership. And act immediately. The room exploded. Inside, the real chaos began. Christopher, unable to control himself, began to scream. Carol, flushed and pale, let out tears. The board members argued with each other, heating up the atmosphere. And I sat as if in the center of a hurricane, feeling an extraordinary, almost ephemeral calm. Suddenly Christopher turned to me, his gaze filled with despair, as if there was a last glimmer of hope left in him. "Shelley, please," his voice broke. "Tell them I can fix it. We can work together again as before." For a long time I looked at the man who once was everything to me. For a moment, I saw the old Christopher in him, scared, vulnerable, and asking for support. But suddenly Carol's hand squeezed his palm imperiously, and it brought me back to reality. I remembered everything, how he trampled on our dreams, and how he undermined his trust in the company. "I'm sorry, Christopher," I said, softly but firmly. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Michael stood up and slammed his fist on the table, interrupting the noise. "I suggest we vote," he said. "Will Christopher continue to run the company, or will he be removed from the post of president? Those in favor of suspension, raise your hands." Time seemed to slow down. One by one, the hands of the board members rose above the table. 1, 2, 3, 4. The vast majority. Christopher, finally realizing what was happening, exhaled in despair. His face fell. "It's not fair." Carol shouted, but her words disappeared into thin air. Everything was settled. Christopher was no longer there, and the company was finally safe. When the meeting ended, Michael came up to me, his gaze gentle but demanding. "Shelley, we need you," he said softly. "The company needs you. Will you come back? Will you help us restore it?" I hesitated. My heart was torn between the desire to help and the desire to finally start life from scratch. But before I could answer, Christopher himself came up to me, desperation mixed with pleading in his eyes. "Shelley, please," he whispered, his voice sounding hopeless. "You know me better than anyone. I can fix it if you just give me another chance." I looked from him to Michael, feeling conflicting feelings clench in my chest. They both hoped for me. The future of the company and my own hung in the balance. It was not just a business decision, but an opportunity to prove to yourself your importance, your worth. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. A few days later, a general meeting of the company's employees was held to announce the changes. I stood in front of a room full of people, looking at faces that reflected a mixture of excitement and expectation. At that moment, I had already been appointed interim CEO, and now I had to guide us to a new future. As many of you already know, I began firmly, despite the pounding of my heart. The last few weeks have been a difficult test for the company. But today we are opening a new chapter. For a moment, my gaze rested on the figure of Christopher, standing at the back of the hall, pale, with a tired expression on his face. Carol was nowhere to be seen. I continued. "Yes, we lost customers. And yes, we faced difficulties. But the heart of this company is your talent, your dedication, and the foresight that you bring with you every day. That's exactly what has remained unchanged." There were whispers of approval from the crowd, giving me extra confidence. I continued by explaining our plans to restore customer trust and stabilize finances. I was standing at the window, looking out at the city, and my heart was as light as it had been for a long time. The windows of the new office gave me not only a panoramic view of the streets filled with life and opportunities, but also the feeling that my life had finally got back on track. The internal tension that always accompanied meetings with Christopher The weight of all those years at the company where I was forced to watch its destructive decisions, all this seemed to have gone away. This office was not full of memories of the past, it was a blank slate. There was a soft knock on the door, pulling me out of my thoughts. I turned around and Evelyn, my faithful right hand, was standing on the threshold, her face beaming with joy. "Shelley, you won't believe this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "We got the Henderson project." My eyes flashed and a sincere smile appeared on my lips. Henderson's project was not just a major contract, it was recognition, an opportunity to work with one of the most respected corporations in the field of responsible creative design. The dream I had been striving for years was now here, a reality. "This is amazing, Evelyn," I said enthusiastically, feeling a warm wave of pride and gratitude fill my soul. "The team must be thrilled." Evelyn smiled and nodded, her eyes sparkling. "They're waiting for you in the conference room. They want to hear your thoughts on the first steps," she said. Then, after a slight hesitation, she added, "Shelley, you inspire them. After everything that happened, you gave them the strength to believe again that we can do something truly meaningful." These words struck a chord with me, deeply. I have always tried to show everyone around me that, despite the mistakes of the past and tense conflicts, our company can stand on a solid foundation based on trust, mutual understanding, and striving for quality. A sincere, almost childish thrill awoke inside me from the knowledge that I had managed to convey this to people. When I entered the conference room, dozens of eyes were looking at me, the eyes of people, each of whom had gone through difficult times and now stood here ready to take on the challenge. In this room, I felt something more than just a working atmosphere. I saw a spark light up on the faces of my colleagues, which indicates a willingness to move forward, no matter what. "Today we begin a new stage," I began, looking up, and my words sounded firm but sincere. "This project is not just a chance to show the world what we can do, it is an opportunity to approve our new approach based on mutual trust, honesty, and faith in the best." I sat surrounded by my team, hearing a quiet hum of discussions and ideas rising in the room, which suddenly turned everything that was happening into a single, living space. It seemed that the walls of the office were imbued with the spirit of creation, as if the past no longer had power over me, and the future, unencumbered by the expectations of others, began to unfold before us with breathtaking purity and boundless possibilities. We discussed Henderson's project, and every idea sounded like an echo of our hopes and hard work. With each new offer, I felt the confidence of my colleagues grow, and how my own doubts, which until recently seemed insurmountable, evaporate. My work was finally not overshadowed by anything. Here I felt respected, not needing anyone's approval. Taking a marker, I held it up to the whiteboard and circled one of the key ideas, saying, as if drawing a line, "Let's imagine a future together, free from our previous fears," I said, and I was surprised at the force with which these words sounded. Let each of us imagine how he sees our project, our common path, unshackled by old dogmas. We are here to create something truly ours. The room was filled with lively laughter, jokes, and then silence as everyone began to thoughtfully write down and develop their proposals. I watched as ideas were born, on a blank slate, the way I once had to clear my own heart and start from scratch when the world around me seemed so unstable and changeable. The past 5 months flashed before my eyes, and I realized how far I had come. Christopher, his failures and mistakes, Carol with her thirst for status, even my own fears that once held me down, all these were not just lessons, but an important part of what I have become today. And the more I thought about it, the clearer I realized I didn't need someone's success, someone's support to become strong and independent. I went through all the trials and stood up, and this realization brought deep, true satisfaction, which every person aspires to. The knock on the door distracted me again. It turned out that it was employees from the marketing department who came with additional ideas for the project. The team gathered, discussed the new proposal, and then, left alone with my thoughts, I felt the deepest gratitude for those who were with me. To all those who believed in me and continued to walk by my side, despite the difficulties,